Alright, so for this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to make a low poly earth. So a low poly earth is super easy to make actually. It's a lot more simple than people think. And if I go to my rendered view here, you'll be able to see that we have, using geometry nodes, we have trees only on the land, which is super, super cool. And we also have a bunch of clouds all over the place. So if this is something along the lines of what you're looking for your project, then I hope this tutorial for you. It's super easy, should only take about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. And it uses very, very basic geometry node setups. It's nothing crazy. This is pretty much as complicated as you'll get. I'll just walk through every single step. So very first thing we want to do is we want to get some textures. We are not going to be modeling anything in this entire scene except for the couple spheres it takes, this icosphere, our UV sphere, and then we're also going to be modeling the clouds, but the clouds are very easy to model. So we're going to start with some textures, and I'm going to leave these two in the description, but if I can't find the original link for them, then I will just leave them in a Google Drive folder, or Google Drive file that you can download. So what we have are these two maps right here. Typically for something like this, you would want a land-to-ocean mask, right? So basically, where's the land, where's not the land? Where's the ocean, where's not the ocean, right? But if you notice, this actually has every single source of water, not just the oceans. Rivers, lakes, ponds, etc. What we want is the specular map. For some reason, the satellite picking this up didn't see all the rivers and ponds as reflective, right? Which is good, because if we go over here and we look at the land, we see that there's only some really, really major lakes, like the Great Lakes, the Red Sea, Mediterranean Sea, other stuff like that over here. But we don't get all those little ponds and stuff, right? Just looks a little bit cleaner. So we're going to be using the specular 8K map. All right, so what do we want to do? Let's get a new Blender file open right here. Okay. Very first thing, let's go into Render, Cycles, change your CPU to GPU, or device to GPU if you have one. If not, CPU is perfectly fine. And then we're going to organize our folders. So we're going to make a couple collections. We're going to call this Non-Destructive Earth. And that non-destructive earth one we're going to be using a little bit later. We're going to make a new collection called Trees, and one more collection called Clouds. Okay. So, collection, non-destructive earth, trees, clouds. Okay. Click on our collections folder. We're going to import a UV sphere. And then before you do anything to it, before you move it, scale it, rotate it, go to the parameters down here and change this 32 to 64, and this 16 to a 32. Just going to give us some more geometry to work with, and also more geometry for our textures to work with. We're going to be adding 3 modifiers: subdivision surface, displace, and decimate. In that order, and it's very, very important you do it in that order, because I'll show you what happens if we don't do it in that order, right? So, what we want are subdivisions. We're going to bump this up to 3 on the viewport and render. This is going to give us a lot of geometry. And especially geometry nodes, once you start getting 200,000, 500,000, a million polygons, then it starts to really, really slow down. So we're going to import this into our non-destructive earth later, and then work with a destructive version. It's going to be a lot better. That's going to have a lot better performance. So for our displacement texture, we're going to add a new texture. We're going to call it Earth Displace. Let's go into our texture properties down here. Click Open. Navigate to our specular 8K map, open that, go back to our modifiers, change this coordinates from local to UV, and the strength from 1 to negative 0.15. We want the negative value because in Blender, black values mean 0 and black and white value means 1, right? So that means the land is going to be at the 0 mark and in 0 in height, and white is going to be the 1 mark in height, right? Which is not what we want. We want the land to be extruding. So in a negative strength value. And then this mid-level, it doesn't really matter what this mid-level is. I just left it at 0.5 for the final result. But it doesn't really matter. The decimate, now what we want is a 0.015. So 1/100th what we just did for our, or 1/10 of what we just did for our strength. Okay. So now this is basically it. This is all we needed for the low poly earth, right? Now, if you don't do these in the right order, what we might get is something like this. We might get curved out We might get some curved geometry or stuff like that. If we decimate before we displace, then it doesn't have enough geometry to work with, and it's not really curved, but it has too little detail, right? So it's very, very important we do subdivision, displace, then decimate to get this very distinct look for our low poly earth. So next we're going to be doing the materials, okay? So I'm actually going to pull up this file in another screen to get the exact colors if we're just trying to copy. So let's go to our materials tab. Let's add a new one. We're going to call it earth. And we're going to, the base color, let me get the exact hex code, 00BC05. That's our hex code. Next thing we're going to do is in our same collection, we're going to rename this to earth just so we can figure out what it is, figure out what it is later. Add an icosphere, bump it up to 3 subdivisions. Go to add modifier, decimate. We're going to decimate this down to about, I'd say about 0.4. Okay. And these are going to be the oceans. So we'll go from icosphere, we'll type ocean. And then again, for the exact color code, just so it stays consistent with the final result, materials, add, we're going to call it ocean, base color, hex, it's 2E47E7. So now, if we go into our color view, we can see that now we have our earth, right? Low poly earth. We have our land, we have our ocean. So there's a little bit of a problem. And if we go into our shaded view, we'll be able to see this problem. I'm going to add a sun lamp just so we can show this. I'm going to turn this up really high just so it's very obvious. The earth is reflective in some areas, but not others. That's the whole point of our specular map, right? Our black values are 0 specular, 0 bright reflectiveness, and our white is 100% reflectiveness, right? So our oceans should be shiny. Turn that roughness down to about 0.1 on our ocean, and our land should be extremely rough, right? We're going to turn that all the way up to 1, okay? That is going to very, very help. There's a bunch of subtle things that we see when we're analyzing art, and this is just one of those things that's really going to matter, that the ocean is reflective and the land is not, right? Looks much, much, much better this way. Also, another thing I found that works really well for this project is if we go to the render properties, down to color management and turn it to very high contrast, that helps the ocean color and the deepness of the colors pop a little bit more. But you don't have to use that. You can just keep it on default settings, which is medium contrast if you'd like. Okay. Let's add the clouds now. That's a little bit easier. Click on our collection, make sure we're in that. Add a UV sphere. And we're going to scale it so like S, and we're going to type in 1.5 or 1.4. Let's do 1.4. And that is going to be where our clouds are, right? So what we could do is we're going to go into geometry nodes, okay? And we are going to set up our entire geometry nodes and then go make our clouds. It's a little bit easier. So again, let me get the exact geometry node set up just in case. Okay, so it's a very, very simple one. What we're going to do, we're going to move this over here, okay? Give us some room. We are going to add a distribute on points, or distribute points on faces, right? Which basically just gives us all these different points all over randomly on the faces, right? We're going to change that to the disk one, the Poisson disk, I think that's what it's called. Not 100% sure. That's okay. Let's turn that density to maybe like 300 or so, but then turn the minimum distance to maybe like a 0.3, okay? So that's going to give us pretty even distribution. If it's too even for you, you can turn this density down and then increase or decrease the minimum distance. I kind of like how even it is, though. I think it looks pretty nice. So that's that. We're going to instance on our faces, or instance on our points. So instance on points, and we're going to drag the instances into geometry. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get our collection of clouds by dragging the collection into our geometry nodes. We're going to separate, reset, and plug this into our instance. We got to pick the instance. Okay. Next, we're going to get a random value node. This is what's going to control our scale. Okay. So our scale, we're not going to set right now because we don't really care, but we're going to turn that minimum up just above 1. Doesn't really matter what it is right now. Last thing we're going to do before we go and make our clouds is we're going to get a transfer attribute node. So attribute, transfer attribute. We're going to go, so why do we want to transfer an attribute, right? What this is going to do, make sure you change that to vector, by the way. What we're going to do is we're going to align the Euler, which is kind of like the direction of something, right, to a vector, right? So what vector are we using, right? We're using a vector from our attribute. What attribute are we using? We're going to use the normal of our faces. And then make sure that's selected as Z. So if I make this, instead of this collection, if I make it a bunch of cones, right? Cone. You don't have to do this. You can just watch if you'd like. But if I plug that into our instance, turn off pick instance, all of the cones are facing directly away, which is exactly what we want. If we did not do this rotation, no matter, let's turn this down actually. There we go. If all of our clouds are facing the exact same direction, which in this case are up, it would not look natural, right? It would not go with the gravity of the Earth, right? That's perfectly spherical, right? So if we add this rotation, this normal transfer attribute, align Euler to vector, rotation, that is going to help us use the normals of the UV sphere we spawned to orient our clouds. So let's put our collection back in there, okay? Clouds, pick instance, separate, reset. Now let's go make our clouds, okay? So we're going to go back into layout over here, and then we're going to disable this collection. Let's go into clouds. We're going to make some very basic clouds. Okay, I do not want to try very hard for this. Let's go into our icosphere, maybe 2 subdivisions, duplicate, move it a little bit, cloud. Also make sure you go to object, set origin center of mass every single time you make a cloud, but it really does not matter what these clouds are, right? Let's make some clouds that are tortoises. That could be kind of cute, right? Maybe like this. There we go. Our cloud. Join. Object, set origin, center of mass, volume. Hide the cloud. We'll make one more. Let's just make it a monkey. That's it. Suzanne. Okay, there are clouds. We're just making very, very basic clouds, right? You can make them a little bit more pretty and just spheres if you want. But I don't really care what they look like. I just think they look pretty just being around the Earth. We're going to disable that cloud collection. So now when we go back, we should be able to see all of our different clouds all over the place, right? This obviously is not what clouds should look like, right? First of all, they're way too big. So let's scale them down a little bit. We're going to go from minimum of 0.02 to probably 0.05. That's a little bit better. Okay. Tiny bit better. Let's decrease the density a little bit. I don't really like that. Maybe we'll make it a 10 or so. Okay. We'll make it a little bit smaller. Let's go like 0.04 maybe. Okay, that's good enough for me. So you can play around with those values. This number right here, this random value, is going to give you the size, and the density factor right here will give you the density. Okay, or the density max. So, okay, that's good enough, right? So, all right. What do we need to do next? We need to do the trees. Let's go make a tree. Disable collection, tree. Go back into our layout. Cylinder. Make sure that cylinder has 6 vertices. We want as little geometry as possible. Right click, or sorry, not right click. Click tab, go into edit mode, face select. We're going to drag this cylinder up until it's about the height of a trunk. Then we're going to extrude it with E. Right click. Okay, it'll reset its position. And then scale it up by about 10 times, I would say. So S scale 10. We're going to extrude upwards. Maybe that high. Pull it in. Extrude. Right click. Scale up, but make it a little bit smaller this time. Right? Maybe about that size. Extrude up. Make it smaller. Extrude. Right click to reset its position. Scale up. But be a little bit smaller. Right? Extrude. Left click. Make it smaller. Maybe we'll lower it a little bit. There we go. And then we have our tree. Right? Very simple. Let's go in the front view by clicking 1 or by clicking the little Y or X over here. Go into X-ray mode. Go to materials and add 2 materials. Okay? So add 2 materials. We're going to call this the leaves. And then the bottom one is going to be the trunk. In Blender, if there is no faces told otherwise, every single polygon in the entire mesh will always default to the material slot 0, which is the top one. Okay? Now, the second one right here, we want to highlight the entire trunk, right? So you can just go like this, drag the trunk, assign. Leaves, we're going to make a green color. Trunk, we're going to make a brown color. Brown, there we go. Make sure, again, that you have a sign for the trunk. So now if I go into color view, turn X-ray mode off, we have our green leaves and our brown trunk. Very important. Next thing we do, turn on that collection again, right? Okay, might take a second. We're going to make this a lot smaller. We're going to make it super, super, super tiny. There we go. It doesn't really matter where the tree is, by the way. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply the scale. So Control A and apply the scale. Make sure that scale is 1, 1, 1, 1, right? Or 1, 1, 1. There you go. All right. Disable our trees, right? Click on our earth. Go into geometry nodes. And then we are going to duplicate this. Okay? Duplicate it. Shift D to duplicate. It'll take a second. Right click. And now we're going to drag this into the non-destructive earth and then disable it. Okay? So now we're going to go and apply these. You should never ever apply modifiers if you can help it. But we can't help it here because otherwise the performance would just be terrible. So we're gonna apply all those. So we have our destructed geometry now. If I want to go back and change that later, I cannot change it. Right? I can edit the mesh all I want, but I can't reverse any of those effects. But I can go into my non-destructive earth and then redo this very short process that we're going to do now. Apply all those, add modifier, subdivision surface, okay? Give it the simple, and then we're going to do 2 levels. And then we're going to apply that to give it a bunch of extra geometry all over the surface, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a new geometry nodes, and then we're going to select from the little select down, we're going to select that first one we just made, okay? And we're going to call it clouds, because that's what it's for, right? And we're going to duplicate it by clicking this little 2 button, and then call it trees, okay? Because it's extremely simple to what our other one was. Instead of this clouds right here with our tree selection geometry nodes, we're going to clear it, and then select trees. And then what we need to do is we need to add a join geometry. So if we go to Shift A, geometry, join geometry over here, we want our original mesh, okay? So we're going to drag that and join geometry. We're going to make these both 1 down here just to see our size. Okay, we need to reduce that. Maybe we'll go down to 0.1 to 0.15. Maybe a little bit bigger, maybe 0.3. Okay, that looks about good. So 0.1 to 0.3, that looks about good. Rotation, we still want that nice Euler rotation going out from the center of the sphere. That's good. But the last thing we want to do that we're going to change is we're going to drag our density factor into the input node. Okay? And what we need to do is we need to go weight paint on this mesh. Go into our layout so it's nice and big. Okay? Let's go into our solid view. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into weight paint mode, and we're going to paint where we want the trees. Okay? A good example to start with is just paint in one area. It doesn't matter what that area is. Okay? But we do not want trees in the ocean. Right? So don't paint the ocean, just paint the land. So we'll start with North America. Right? Just right there. This happens to be where I live. Right? So North America, we have that. We just created a vertex group. Okay? There's our active vertex group. So we're just going to leave it named group because it doesn't really matter what it's named. And let's go back to our modifier over here and change this density factor. Click on this little present looking icon, the attribute toggle, and then select our point group. So now, if I go back inside, right, of my geometry nodes, we should be able to turn this density way up, right? And then see, we need to turn the distance minimum to 0 just for bug testing. And now we can see that the only place on the entire Earth where my trees are is where I weight painted, right? So if we go and weight paint some more, let's go over here to Russia. Let's go to our layout. Oops. So Russia, Asia area, right? If I go to weight paint and I start to go like this and start to paint, we're gonna have trees start to pop up. Okay. And if you want to erase trees, you just turn that weight from 1 to 0, and now I can go through and erase them. Okay. So there we go. That is basically it. Okay. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, want me to expand on something, or if you guys are having problems with any of this setup, let me know. I will leave those texture files in the description. I will not forget, because I sometimes forget. But this is what the final look should look like, right? If you wanted to know what my background was in this other file right here, really quickly, it's the Starlight and Atmosphere add-on, okay? It is a paid add-on. I believe it's about $50 to $70. I'm not 100% sure what it is now. But I'm not endorsing it. I just love it. It gives very, very nice, accurate lighting. But I will also try and leave the final blend file, just in case you want to check your work. If you just want to rip the blend file, you can. But yeah, so check in the description for those files, and let me know if you guys have any problems.